Hello and welcome to the Honest Business Podcast. I hope you're very well. Today we have a freelance team Q&A, which I think is going to be super useful because I know many people have got freelance teams or are building freelance teams or are moving from having a kind of in-person, fully employed team and maybe switching out for a freelance team. So let's dive into this one. And for context, for anyone listening, I have a freelance team and have done for the whole of my business, and most of my freelance team are virtual. Some of them are in person. We have about a 50-50 split. However, saying that, nobody works in an office. I have like one or two people who might come and have like an hour with me in my home office. But nobody's like, we don't have an office space where everybody's trolling to every day for those of them that are geographically near to me. So freelance team is something that I'm really used to working with and building, is something I'm a real advocate for and I really love. I also have clients who have fully freelance virtual teams. And I think the virtual piece is a really interesting one because actually there's definitely sort of things you can take away from this, even if you have an employed team, but they are virtual. And for some of my clients, like I've got a real mixture. Some of my clients have quite large teams that are totally freelance and are virtual. And when we say virtual, some of them we're talking about like around the world. Some people we're talking about like my team are all within the UK. But I do have clients who have, people all over the place within their team, virtually and freelance. And I've also got I've also got clients who, some of them have a really large team, but you could argue that they're sort of virtual in the sense of they'll be employed by the business, but because of the way they run their business and how that all kind of unfolds, they're not all in an office every day, 9 to 5, sat around desks talking to each other, and they're on the move and they're on the go. And so they're never all together. They're never all sort of in one room, in person, having a conversation, or very rarely are. So, regardless of where you sit on that kind of spectrum, this episode should help. We've got 5 questions that have either been asked to me from clients or that I put a box out on Instagram and people could send a question. And I picked these 5 that I thought were really good ones. And then at the end, I've just got sort of 5 top tips, like key takeaways that you can go away and actually implement on if this is you and you want to kind of improve your team setup. So, just to kick off with, a freelance team typically means that you are not employing them as a business for the business to be on their payroll. They are typically sending you an invoice every month and you are paying that invoice and they're doing a piece of work for you. For some people that might be in person, but more and more frequently in this day and age, a freelance team typically means a virtual team or a semi-virtual team where they're not particularly seeing you every week or every day. So the number one question for today is an interesting one because I think it's something that people do worry about, both people who've had a freelance team for a while and people who are new to it. So the question to kick us off is, how do you deal with team members progressing their own businesses whilst working with you? Now, I think this is a fantastic question because it's something that I definitely have firsthand experience of, and I also support people with a lot, and this is something that comes up. So typically, if you are employing freelancers, within the name of it, it means that they don't have a full-time job with you, and therefore they naturally, most of the time, will work for numerous other people potentially. Or they might have, their own business doing something, and then they might do work for you freelance on the side that kind of is an addition and adjacent to their income that maybe has nothing to do with the business that they run. And the question is, I suppose it's a worry where people think like, oh, well, if they're progressing their own business, are they going to leave me? Are they going to, completely disregard my work? I think there's just a lot of worry and fear that comes up. What I would say around this is down to you being proactive in how you're going to choose your mindset around it. So for me, our business obviously is built on the fact that I help female entrepreneurs and I help them grow their businesses. So for me, I get really excited when team members are progressing their businesses and growing their businesses because I'm like, woohoo, great. This is just like more people we can help and, in a way somehow that helps them. And I really like being involved with that. And throughout the years of my team, we've had different members. Most of my team stay for a while and we keep a kind of core team, but people come and go, and we leave or part ways for whatever reason that's it's right for different parties at different times. And I have definitely over the years helped people to actually grow their businesses, and in not in a way of like them becoming a client, but I just mean in terms of giving them access to things. I think I've mentioned this before, like trainings, particularly young members of the team. Like I've taken a chance on people before, like years and years ago, on people who were just sort of starting up or were in college and were wanting to get more experience and things. And we obviously paid them and they charged me, etc. But I'd help them in other ways and kind of giving them access to education, stuff like that. It's something that is important to me, like for the ethos of the business and the values that we have, that I want people to progress in their lives and their business. So for me, I don't take it as like from a lack mindset perspective. I look at it really positively of like, I want people to progress their businesses because I also believe it will help me. So for example, some of my team don't have that much of a big business outside of what they do for me. They maybe have an employed role, or they choose not to have like many other clients. And then some people on my team have like whole businesses that they're running adjacent to what they're doing for me, and whereas I'm a client of their business, or or separately, and they have a separate business on the side. I just see it very much as like anybody who is progressing their craft and progressing what they do is a bonus for me. Like I love to see it of what changes are they evolving and what movements are they making forward, because hopefully it's going to benefit the work that we do together, and inevitably I find that it does. If we remove my experience out of it and I look more at, where can this go wrong, or what worries have you had, or what can come up, I think sometimes where this goes wrong is when people are jealous or people are worried and they're not communicating it. So if you are worried, if you have a team member who is freelance and all of a sudden their business is really taken off, let's just say, for example, social media manager, because I know that comes up a lot. Yeah, people often have a freelance team member who is their social media manager. First of all, you need to understand, like, have they been onboarded to understand that they're a member of the team, or are you a client of their agency? Because those are two separate things, and this is where people often get it wrong because there's a disagreement in terms of who somebody is. And so really think about, okay, if you're a client of their agency, then potentially you're not going to get certain things that I'm going to talk through in this episode around culture and how do you integrate them, etc. If you've hired them on the basis of like, this is a freelancer in the sense of you are hiring them as an individual and they are coming into the business, then you kind of want to say, give them the benefit of the doubt that they're going to do a good job and they're still going to keep your work head of the game. And I think the way to look at that is like, look at yourself with how you view your workload. Like, just because you want to progress your business doesn't mean that you dump all your clients or just like leave them on the side as a last minute thing. Like, I would hope not anyway. Like, if we ever want to do something in the business, clients are still served first. The clients are still like there, and then we do the other stuff we want to do. So I think be really like normal in terms of thinking about like, how do other people manage this? Don't just get in your head and assume that you're going to be left to one side, because I just don't think that's true. And people, want to do a good job and want to work with you. If you do get to a point where, let's just say the social media example happens, where this person's business, you can clearly see it's like progressing really well, and you're thinking, I don't know if this is aligned anymore, of like, are they still going to want to work with me? My solution to that is have a conversation with them, check in with them, keep checking in with them, at decent intervals, and say like, how are you? How are things going? What is the vision for the business? And you kind of get an understanding of where they want to go means that you can either prepare for the fact that things might change at some point, or cheerlead them along and be like, this is great, I'm so happy that this is moving for you. And I think it's really about having that communication open, because inevitably, because it's a freelance role, you can't ever guarantee that they're not going to leave, but you can't ever guarantee that an employed person isn't going to leave. And I think this is the mistake people have. Like, people come to me and think that having a freelance team is more risky and it's more kind of worrying, because they sort of think that people are just going to leave you a job at the hat. Whereas I think that having an employed team is more risky than that, because I think for a freelance team, people really value long-term relationships, and they value that long-term connection of knowing that, they're always going to have that invoice paid and they're always going to work with you in a really positive way. And if you're a nice person to work with, there's no reason, I don't think, that you need to panic necessarily. And I also think when you look at business owners that are progressing with their businesses whilst working with you, you've got to look at where have you got a fear around people leaving, where have you got a fear that something's going to change. And many people do, you know, people are terrified of someone in their business leaving and the whole thing going to shit. But that is highlighting other issues in your business that you need to look at. It's not about them, and it shouldn't ever be about them. It's not fair for you to kind of channel some really dodgy energy about them progressing their business just because you have got various insecurities about your business. So, like, for me, my opinion on that is, how do I deal with team members progressing their business while working with me? Like, I'm cheering them on. I'm happy for them. I want them to progress. I want them to enjoy their life and enjoy what they're doing, because I believe that, you know, if they're happy, they're going to do a better job for me. And I hope that, you know, they're going to really enjoy our work even more, bring more innovation to our work, or come with new ideas and say, hey, I'm doing this in my business, or I'm doing this with a client, let's do it for us. And I've had that where team members have said, you know, like, oh, I do this with X, Y, and Z person, I really think this could be something we could adopt and put in our own spin on it. How do you feel about that? And I'm like, yeah, great. Like, I love that. That's what I want from someone. I want someone to come in with a different brain and a different set of eyes for their specific area that they're responsible for. Question number two is, how does communication work? I want someone to be working when I am. Oh, okay. So this is another worry that people have around freelance teams. If you are used to working in an office, or you're used to working in an environment where everybody's available at a touch of a hat and you sort of walk over to a desk and someone's there and you can have the conversation, this does take some time to get used to, because I guess you're sort of, in your head, you maybe have this idea of a freelance team and you think that everyone has to be available 9 till 5. Now, some of your businesses, you're going to need that. Like, it might be that you're in a business where you do need that, but most businesses in this day and age don't actually need that. It's just they've been conditioned to think they do. So, communication, and how does it work? For most freelance teams, what tends to happen is there's some sort of group chat. So, whether that's Slack, WhatsApp, Voxer, Telegram, some kind of communication tool, Google, whatever the Google thing is that you can talk to each other, some kind of group thing. Then you've often got some kind of individual touch point. So, for me, we have a group chat, which for us doesn't get used that much because it just, the way our business work doesn't necessarily need to. But then each person I'll chat with individually, so there's often this touch point of one-on-one communication. And for us, that's through Voxer rather than email. So I choose not to use email as like communication. People are talking through Voxer. We can obviously use email, but in terms of general back and forth, it's done through one place. And the communication piece is, you have to lay out really clearly what the communication policy is. So when anybody comes onto my team and integrates into the team, we have in our team a real clear policy of, anyone can message any time of day, and it's the team's responsibility to manage their notifications. And I have this in Maze Accelerator that we run as well, because I just think it's a really good policy. So I have a client facing as well, where we basically say, if you are working at 11 o'clock at night, send your email, send your message on Voxer or Slack or wherever, because whoever's receiving that message, is their responsibility to manage their own time and boundaries around notifications, etc. And the reason we say that is because I have team who work at different times. So depending on the time of year, depending on where they're at in their lives, some people work best on my team at like 10, 11 o'clock at night. Other people are working at 5 in the morning. It's just a constant movement thing. If you've got people in different locations around the world, etc., you need to have a clear communication policy, and that's what we set out in the business. And I encourage people to do that, because you want people to know when can they communicate. You also want to kind of set a general rule or a general kind of consensus of what you expect in terms of, are you happy with a response within 24 hours? Do you want it within 12 hours? Are you happy with it within 5 days? And that's something that you need to communicate between the freelancer and you, or the business owner and you. The one thing I'd really suggest to you is that you get really clear on, are you being a client of, as I mentioned before, like their agency, for example, or are you hiring an actual person? I personally, this is all going to depend on your industry, the size of your business, your growth goals, what you're trying to do. For most people's core team, you kind of want to hire a person specifically a lot of the time, because it helps with this whole connection building thing. Sometimes when people get frustrated about a freelance team, it's because they don't realize that they've actually hired into a kind of done for you process where the person is not integrated into the team. And there's nothing wrong with either of them, can I just say? Like, it's really important that you understand what you're hiring and what you're buying into. So, like, for example, if someone joins into May's Accelerator, they're hiring me as like a coach, an advisor, a consultant, but they're only getting me in terms of within the constraints of my boundaries that I've set on my program. If someone hires me in terms of one-on-one as an advisor and they buy a kind of ongoing package, which typically means they see me say like twice a month, and they have Voxer access support to me or some kind of communication outside of session, that's when I can integrate more into their business. Now, it's unlikely that I'm going to be put into the like group Slack thing or like some kind of group thing, because most of the rest of the team aren't going to see me. But that is when we can start having a kind of more team focused orientation of how we communicate. I'm still going to uphold my boundaries and they're going to still uphold theirs, but I can be integrated more. And that's kind of where I look at my private practice, and I have a very small amount of people at any one time who I can do that with. But that's kind of a good example for you to see the difference between like the one-on-one advisory private practice. I can be integrated and it can be more kind of like personal, integrated into the team. Whereas if you're joining something like May's Accelerator, or say like an agency where they're delivering an output for you, it might be more like you're going to them to get support or to see what they've done. And I think when you're hiring people, you need to really understand which of those categories are you getting involved with, because that's where sometimes the issue lies. But in terms of communication and how does it work, it's just about you picking where you want the communication to happen, really being clear in how you communicate that, and then sticking to it. So don't you then set something up and not include WhatsApp, but then start WhatsApping the person. It's not going to work. For example, like with my team, we might talk on Instagram message, but it's me replying to something fun that they've been up to in their life, or we're just sending something that's more friendly in out context of work. If it's in the context of work, I then put it on the appropriate channel in the appropriate communication space, because that's only fair for their boundaries as well as mine. And I think when you're communicating, having a way that you can send a message to all people is really important, like we discussed before. So I have a client who has a freelance team and they do use email as kind of one of their main communication methods, but they do have a way of communicating an output to all people, and then that's kind of a way for them to stay on top of one another and kind of keep connected. Question number 3 is, how do you build team culture virtually? This again is another interesting one. It's where there's a lot of research going into it at the minute. There's a lot of people got a lot of opinions on it. This is very different. The answer to this question, in my opinion, is different if you've got an employed team to some degree. I think building freelance team culture can be hard. Some freelancers are not going to want that. That's the whole reason they're not employed. So that's fine, right? Some people, and I think most people, are open to culture and community and some kind of touch point, but it's got to be done in the right way. So again, reverting back to my business, I feel like we don't really talk about my business a lot. I try to keep it very like not about me, but today's might be helpful. For our business, for example, I would say we have a nice team culture in our business. It's not like the tightest knit team you've ever seen in the world. Most people have never met each other. Some, you could argue that if they cross each other in the street, they might not really know each other. However, we do have a nice team culture, but it's very low touch. So, for example, if we said to people, oh, do you want to, like, we're going to meet and have some sort of like meal or drinks or something, I think everybody, well, we know everybody would be very much happy to be like, yeah, let's do that. And they want to kind of participate and see people and know people. Now, part of that is because they know that the culture that I've built in terms of why those people have earned their place on the team is there. Therefore, they've got some sort of shared value or shared belief or kind of interest of some degree. So I think it's about really picking, like, what do you want the vibe of the team to be? What does culture mean to you? Because team culture to me, for my team now, means one thing, and I'm very happy with it. I'm very pleased with it. If we had a team that was much more involved in every day, or was much more what I mean by that is like, if we had a team that was delivering, let's just say, like services, I would have a lot more time. I'd need to put a lot more time into developing team culture because of that. So some of my clients, they have a team that is virtual, and we do have to create a much more intensive programming system into how do we build culture. Putting everybody on a Zoom call on a Friday afternoon, I don't necessarily think is the answer to building a really strong team. Having a short 15-minute strategy positioning meeting can be good. I know some people be like, what the hell? Like, why? Sometimes getting everybody on a call, doing a short period of time, hearing people's voices, seeing people can be nice. I think having on that group team chat thing a way for people to share wins, or share wins through departments, or share monthly updates can be very beneficial. Having a way for them to lean into what is useful is also really good. So how can we share, this has worked really well for marketing this month, how might someone else who's in a different department of the business want to use that learning? I think when you're looking at building team culture virtually, it does come from you. And I think this is where people kind of stumble a bit, because it is very much powered by how you show up and how you are kind of talking to people one-on-one, and how that then switches together. Now, in my business, in the team members have to talk to each other sometimes without me being there, so that they're communicating with each other. And when I built the team, it was very clear. I was very clear from the off that was the case, and were people happy with that? And that in itself also builds a bit of team culture, because you can set expectations out, you can set kind of what you want to happen in that case. But that can be helpful, because it helps people kind of get a grasp of, okay, well, I'm going to be talking to other people. So when you're looking at how do you build team culture virtually, I do think any in-person pieces you can get works really well. And to be honest, most of the people I work with do find a way for bringing the team together. Not all of them, but some of them, whether that's like once a year, once a quarter, once every other year. How can you get people in person? Even if it's not all together, but you've got like different people at different times together, having that in-person touch point massively helps. And doing this dual thing of predominantly virtual and freelance, but maybe they come together, that I think is one of the golden tickets for keeping everybody in line. Because building the team culture virtually is hard if you aren't clear and you don't sort of radiate what you believe. So like for me, I find it easy because who we are as a business is clear, and what I will and won't accept is clear, I believe. I hope so. Anyway, but it's also very like open and fluid, so the communication's always there. If you build a culture that is very like siloed and very like this person's working on this and this person's working on that, and no one knows each other's name, gets a bit more difficult. So like being open, sharing a kind of team structure with people, saying this is who deals with social, this is who deals with this, these are all freelancers, but here's so and so's name. Even like how do people communicate with each other, like who has an internal email address, who doesn't. So like we give most people on the team, if they don't need it, we don't, but like we don't just create an email just for the sake of it. But most people on the team, anyone who needs one, gets, an @MayJames email address, because it then means it's easier for people to communicate. Helping them kind of integrate in is nice. How do you build team culture virtually? We've done nice things of, like last year I sent advent calendars to all the team. I either gave them in person or posted them out. And it was just like a cheap Cadbury's advent calendar, which personally I think is the best advent calendar. So that was the kind of reason behind that. I was like, do we buy them all a fancy advent calendar? And I was like, no, I think Cadbury's is the best. And I sent them a little note. I think, yeah, we wrote a little note and I sent them out. And, it did take a bit of time. But how nice that we can send that. And, like, to me, I think that is lovely. The small touches are nice. And I think people really get obsessed with the big stuff instead of looking at the tiny little stuff. Also, you build your team culture virtually by saying thank you. I really believe this. I believe how you communicate with people is important. And I'm not saying you've got to like make every message really elaborate. You don't. People get messages off me which is 3 words or 2 words or 1 sentence with a lack of punctuation. But trying to remember to semi-regularly say, thanks so much, or this was a really good piece of work, I really enjoyed the way that you delivered this to me. That in itself builds a culture of, we are a feedback-based team and we're going to value people progressing in certain ways. It's just little things like that, in my opinion, that helps build the team culture virtually and really adds a kind of nuance to it. But ultimately in your team, what you want to happen is you want that feeling that you try and portray to customers and that you're selling to people to be what is felt inside. And that's what I try and do. It's like, if we want a friendly, really accessible service that people want to be a part of, how do we create that internally in the team? Number 4 in our freelance team Q&A question situation is, what strategies can be used to monitor the productivity and quality of work of freelancers? This is a killer question because I know that some people panic about this. So, what strategies can be used to monitor the productivity and quality of freelancers? I think this comes down to hiring the right people. I really, really do. So, first up, don't just find someone on a whim, put them in the role, leave them. That's just not going to work, in my opinion. So really make sure you're clear about who you're trying to hire in the first place, which again, people skip. I think kind of building a hiring ad, like literally going about the process as if you were going to employ them, I think is really helpful for you to make sure that there's actually a role there. Sometimes people are trying to hire a freelancer for their team, but then they're actually realizing it's not really a role and they just need to hire a kind of project-based thing, or they need to do the agency thing that we've just spoken about. So really get clear on what you want them to do. And then you can put in as many parameters as you want to around managing and monitoring productivity and quality of work. So you could do things the way you want to see timesheets. You might want to have them tracking in a certain way, maybe in your ClickUp or some kind of system where you're tracking everybody and you've got loads of freelancers. I think depending on how many freelancers you've got depends on how this works. The more people you've got, the more kind of systems and checkpoints you need to make that happen. But typically it's around trust is the other thing. And also around, are you paying for output? Are you paying for hours? So some people are going to be paying for, I want you to do X, Y, and Z thing. Here's the cost that I'm prepared to pay, or how much they're going to charge you. Whereas some of you will be on like hourly retainers with people, and therefore you're like, well, how do I get the most out of the time I'm getting with them? And I do think this is tricky, right? Because you've always got this thing in your head of, am I getting the most out? Am I not? And from my experience, it comes down to trust. It's trusting people. And, I've got a lovely relationship with the people I work with where sometimes, if maybe they haven't used all their hours, but they're like, that's fine, we'll use them in a different month, and they carry them forward. Other people have got various policies that they want to use, of like, well, you lose them or you don't or whatever. But I think being with someone long term, I do think you build a relationship and you build a kind of trust and you build this back and forth that you're happy with people. So for some people I work with, they're very happy to say, like, for example, I might have the strategy of something might change and I might message, like marketing's where it changes a lot. Yeah. So marketing, I might message and say, right, I want to stop doing this or change this or shift this. And then they've got this time that's available to them. And so either it's like, did the hours just sync? Sometimes they'll move forward. Do they, are they stored for another time? Are you still paying them? Like, it just depends on who's got the contract, whose contract have you signed, what does the contract say in it? And this is why your contract's really important. But also, I do think there's a human element of it. And some people are happy to work in are more flexible than others in terms of how do they work. When it comes to monitoring productivity and quality of work, your feedback system has got to be in place. And this is something that I think is the thing that people get wrong. Because they're virtual, I think people find it even harder to give feedback and be honest. But when they're freelance and when they're virtual, you've got to be even more clear in your feedback. So you need to be able to say, no, I don't like this. No, this isn't good enough. No, this doesn't work. You've also got to have the ability for you to be flexible to say, how can I better support them? How can I give better instruction? How can we create a process that makes that easier? Being really open, and again, communication being the key thing here. But I would say the quality of work piece comes down to hiring well first, being really clear in expectations, but also letting them say what they want to say, like letting them explain why they've done something a certain way, or why does it take them X amount of time. Like, I'll quite regularly ask team members and say, oh, you know that thing that you do in the business, how long does that take you roughly? And I'm asking them not based on me trying to like get the time down, or trying to like figure out how I can reduce it and save money, or how I can like do some sort of mastermind thing with it. I'm just asking because I want to understand in my business how long things are taking. And when you've been in that a long time where you don't do many things, certain things in your business, you do want to know how long it takes. You do want to do an audit of cost and understand, okay, well, we're putting this output out and it's costing us this amount of money. And what does this, how much is this costing the business? But having that conversation with them can help with monitoring, how much do you get out of the time that you're paying for? The other thing I would say is that if you're worried about productivity, is set an expectation and saying, okay, what would it take for that task to take X amount of time? What stops it from taking X amount of time? Because you need to fully understand why it's taken X amount of time, because then you'll get a better understanding of, does it actually need to change, or actually is it all right? Does it make sense? Was your kind of prediction or your thought process incorrect about how long it should take? I think quality of work is something that when you set an SOP in a business, the SOP should be good enough so that the quality of work will be met. So most of the time, if people are unhappy about quality of work, I'm like, well, have you set the SOP right? Is it there? Is it clear? Is the instruction clear? If it is all in place from a systems perspective, and it is a case of, they don't have enough attention to detail, or they are just kind of rushing through things, then that's a question of, you decide, are they a fit for the business or you're not? And I think something you've got to be really clear on is, certain freelancers are better than others, just like anything in life. Certain people have a different attention to detail than others. And in certain areas of your business, you're going to want that more than others. So for certain areas of your business, it doesn't really matter. For other areas, you're like, no, it needs to be 1000% like correct and really specific. And so when that's the case, it's like you go through a process of saying to the person, I'm not happy with this. It needs to be X, Y, and Z. I can't keep having mistakes. I can't keep changing this, that, and the other. If no improvement's made, then there's a question around, do you change and do you move on? And people hang on to people in their business too long, and that's the same whether they're employed or not, I think. But building a freelance team really forces you to have a mirror up at all times reflected at you, because you're constantly looking at, are we embodying what we say we are? Are we moving forward in the way we want to? Are we creating what I have this vision for the business to be? And the team is what is going to make that happen or not. And so how you direct and lead that is important. And that's why I say to people, like, even if you have a freelance team of 2 people, you've got a VA and maybe you've got a social media manager, you still have to work on your leadership. You still have to look at that as a team, because you are communicating with them, and the way you communicate ultimately is your leadership. The way that you're saying, hi, I want to do this, the business is going in this direction, this is what the plan is for the rest of the year, that is leadership. And the people who get the most out of their freelance teams, in my opinion, are the ones who can set those boundaries, who can have that culture, who can be really clear and help them motivate them, help get them excited. When I meet people in team members in person, or I'm delivering a strategy piece, or we're having a meeting, I'm wanting them to be motivated and excited about the business that they're working on. I really want people who work in my business to think, oh yeah, I get to work on May's stuff today. I'm excited. I want to do that, rather than like, oh God, I've got to look at May's account. I don't want to look at that. I don't want to log in. And, I don't know whether people sit on that. Like, hopefully, we don't do it very often, but whenever we have done a kind of like, how do you find working with May, or what's your thought process around like working on May's team, we've had lovely feedback. I'm sure at times people do think, oh, I can't really be bothered. But on the whole, I really want people to want to be on the team, because if they don't, I want them to go, and I want them to put someone in there who does. So really figuring out, like, how do you make sure that people want to be on your team and want to do the work? And I think a lot of that comes down to being a nice human being. and appreciating people's time and people's effort and respecting it. And I know as a business, as a small business, that's hard. Sometimes there are deadlines, times, tricky times, things in people's lives that happen where it's hard to be on the form that you want to be all the time. No one's expecting you to be a superhero, but it is about really figuring out what your expectation is and understanding that with a freelance team, it comes down to you. I really try and take that on for myself. I just try and think like, if you're not happy with the quality of work or the productivity, if you're not going to address it and not going to find a solution and to try and help them and say, how can we get this to a better standard? It's on you. It's not on them. And people disagree with me on that, but I think the only thing you can control is how you show up to your team. And so it's very important that you take the responsibility to say, how can I help the situation? How can I improve it? How can I address it? The fifth question that we've got today about freelance teams is, how can you manage having a dual team? So where you've got some virtual and some in person. And this is another good question. And I guess actually we could even say, how do you manage having a dual team where some people are employed, maybe they're in person, and some people are virtual and freelance? And I think it is tricky. Okay, if you have some employed and some freelance, I think it is a bit of an issue, not an issue, but it's hard, and sometimes it's difficult from a boundary perspective and kind of making sure everyone feels equal. And I don't mean in terms of the freelancers, I mean often it's in terms of getting the employed gang to feel okay, and that can be hard. It's something that I don't necessarily feel like I'm necessarily answering a question on a podcast, because it's usually a case-by-case business, depending on what the business does, how it works, what the freelancer's doing versus the employed person. Are they doing the same task? That's where it can get a bit more tricky. However, how do you manage having a dual team? It's about really understanding the shared vision of the business and the shared values and really getting everybody on that same page. So looking at, where are the similarities? Where can you get everybody on the same page, glued in, drilled in? So the mission of the business, what you're doing, what your impact is. Impact's really important. When people understand what the impact is, they can be a lot more connected to what is happening. If you are having, say you've got a dual team, if you are having something where you're taking the in-person team out somewhere, inviting the virtual team can be a really nice option. Or if you're going to do like, I don't know, some sort of like training in person, can you add a Zoom element on where other people can come if they want to? Offering touch points is really nice. Getting opportunities for everybody to get together is also a lovely one. And it is tricky because I know it's expensive and it's hard to figure out. Like, it's something that in person, getting together everybody in person is something our team is not good at. We really struggle because we've got people from like the top of the country to the bottom of the country, basically. And so find somewhere for everyone to meet and everyone to on the same day and, all that. And we don't make it like, it's not like you have to come and everything. It's kind of tricky. So I know that it's hard, but where you can, that's really nice. And even if it's not the whole team, but certain people together. So we've had it before where sometimes we can get like half of the team or two of the team. Like recently in the summer, we managed to get half of the team together. And then a few weeks later, I saw another person. And like, you can do things where you can try and get people together somewhat. But having a dual team is more challenging, in my opinion. But again, it's about boundaries. It's about people understanding what they're there to do. And it's also about understanding, like, are you having just one core team, or are you having one core team and then you've got freelancers who help you around that? And that can work depending on what, I have some amazing clients who have on their boundaries kind of the thing of, I am not a team member and I won't be. So if you look at it from a flip side, like, you can find people on the spectrum of freelancers everywhere. Like, some people I've worked with have said, I do not want to be part of a virtual team. I'm not interested in team build and I'm not interested in getting to know other people. They want to go in, do the work, come out, and that's that. And that can work because you might have a core team where most of them are in person, and then your freelancers are kind of dotted around to support them, and actually they don't want to be included. And so really that's why it comes down to the hiring piece. It comes down to really understanding who is it that you're trying to work with and what do you want and need from them, because that massively will help with figuring out where they all sit. That's my answer to that question. I think it's a longer answer once you know your business and the industry, etc. But that's kind of my top level thoughts on it. So, to end this episode, I have got 5 key top tips. Some of them we've sort of briefly touched on, but I want to end on these 5 top tips for if you've got a freelance team, how do you make it work? How does it kind of run smoothly? How do you get the most out of it? So, my first one is meet in person when possible. Again, as was mentioned, sometimes that is not going to be happening, but where you can meet in person, I don't mean the whole team has to get together. I literally just mean you and somebody. So I try very hard to meet in person where I can, particularly key members of the team. So if I've got someone who does quite a lot of work for me, or someone who is in the business substantially, or has some sort of like manager title, and do we go into this or not? When I'm saying manager title, I don't necessarily mean they're managing people underneath them. What I'm saying is they're responsible for an area or a department in my business. Then I try and meet with them. You might have someone on your business, for example, like a VA, where you don't necessarily need to meet them because they're doing very functional tasks where you're sending them a piece of work and they're completing it. Typically, you want to meet people when they're doing something where they're responsible, and when you're giving them responsibility of, you need to lead the strategy on this, or you need to create something and report back, and you want that kind of in person. And I feel really confident that our team at May James is working so well, and has worked so well for a long amount of time, because one, we stick there or thereabouts with kind of similar amount of people. And kind of just say, I don't have a massive team, a small team, but stick with people for a long time so we really get to know them. But also we meet in person when possible, and that's literally kind of once a year, twice a year, 3 or 4 times a year. It's not usually more than that. Some of my team live near me. Some of my team are family, which you might know, 2 of them. And so that obviously makes it a lot easier because I can see them. I can see them various points. But meeting in person where possible really does help. That in-person connection is powerful, and I am happy to spend money on it in the business because I think it's useful. My second tip is onboarding. You have to do your onboarding really well. Onboard deeply, do it lengthy, make it well, make it good. Like, we have a onboarding system in the business. I am really involved. If a person's coming into my business, I'm involved in the onboarding. I take the time. If I need to, I will go and do it in person. So I've spent whole days with people before. If I, to help them on board, we've done strategy kickoffs. It depends what their role is in the business. But if it's a core role, I will go and spend time with them. We'll meet in person. We'll try and figure something out where we can really help them integrate into the business. We have like a onboarding review form where people can, once they've been onboarded into the business, we send them this thing saying, like, how did you find the onboarding? Like, the last one we had was last year, and the person replied being like, I think they said something like, it was the best onboarding I've ever had for a client. Like, I've really enjoyed it. It's really nice to know everything's super clear. It's just really easy. So, like, we try really hard to give a clear onboarding, because I really believe that if you do a good onboarding, you get a way better outcome. And I believe that with clients, I believe it across the board, but I also believe it with team members. So we try really hard to get the onboarding right. And this has been built up over time, right? This doesn't all happen overnight. And it didn't happen when we first started the business, obviously. But now try really hard to make sure that onboarding is very good, because it will pay off the time you put in. And most people want to skip this because most people are hiring too late, they're panicked, they're in a rush, and therefore they skip on this. Number 3 is setting clear expectations. I cannot tell you enough how important this is. Please, please set clear expectations of what you want from the start. Ideally, when you're trying to hire them and you're having like a consultation or an interview or some sort of conversation around like, are you the right fit for one another, I literally lay it out. Like, I literally am like, this is gonna happen, this is gonna happen, how will you respond with this? Like, I say, like, sometimes I'm gonna need something from you in X way, does this work for you or not? And I will say, like, sometimes I'll say I'm really straight down the line in how I talk. Are you comfortable with that? Or do you need someone who's like really like, hi, blah, 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 are you okay? Because I'm not that sometimes. I have that in the business, like, at certain points, but I can't promise that every single message I'm going to send to you is like, hi, hope you're well, hope you've had this amazing time, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes I'm like, can you do this? Can you send this? Can you speak to so-and-so about X? And if that doesn't work for someone, they're not a fit, and that's okay. They can find a different person to work with, and I'll find a different person to be on the team. But you've got to be really clear in your expectations and kind of what you expect as how the business runs. The fourth tip around freelance teams is setting honest communication guidelines. You cannot hide when it comes to freelance teams. You need to be explicit in how you want to be communicated to, because one of the frustrations people always come to me is, so and so sends me email, or so and so does this, and so talks to me in this way. I'm like, right, but you tell them otherwise. Like, just say to them, I want to communicate in this way, or this isn't working. So having honest communication guidelines around when are you going to respond, what's the response time, how do they say, like, I'm not going to be around. Like, we have a team holiday like form that people can submit when they're on holiday, so that we know. Because I have a freelance team, they don't obviously have to ask for holiday because they're a freelancer. They can be on holiday when they want. But it's nice for me to know and for the whole team to know when someone's away. And so they then submit the form, and then it goes into a shared thing where I can go in and we can see at any point, okay, well, so-and-so's off then, so-and-so's off then, so-and-so's off then. That just helps us all to stay really clear and understand, well, we're unlikely to get a communication from so-and-so because they're not even here, they're not at work. Having really honest communication guidelines is really, really important, and it helps everybody to be on the same page. In my opinion, you can't really over communicate when it comes to the freelance team situation. And my fifth top tip for having a successful kind of freelance team would be that you always need to have your next meeting in the diary. So there might be some people who you don't have a meeting with, but for most people on your team, you're going to be having either like weekly, monthly, quarterly meetings with. And so have that meeting always in the diary. So if we, like most of the team, we meet, actually, I say, what? No, that's not true. I was going to say monthly, but that's not true. Weekly, and there's all sorts of different nuances. But, we try and always have a meeting in the diary so that it's always clear when there's the next check-in. Often when the communication kind of doesn't go to plan is when people just don't have a structure to when they're meeting. And then it sort of just feels like they're like, I don't really know what I'm doing here. I don't know if I'm getting what I'm paying for. I don't know if this is working. So try and have, where possible. Like one of my team members, we don't have like a regular meeting in because they don't necessarily need it. We can just meet whenever like they need to. But for certain people in the business, we have like regular check-ins, whether that's monthly, weekly, and we obviously talk in between that via our communication. But having that meeting in the diary is really good because you want to have a one-on-one. You want to know, like, and get to know them and say hi and stuff like that. So that can be helpful. We could talk about this forever. I feel like we've only just like got into slightly the freelance team sort of questions, but if you've got more questions about freelance teams, I'd be well up for answering them and doing another episode. So feel free to send them over. And it's definitely, I think it's definitely where the world's going. I think it's definitely there's so many benefits of having a freelance team. There's so many kind of wins to it, and the flexibility is beautiful, and the access to talent you get is phenomenal, and the way in which it forces your business to be agile is really good. I think that's another thing, when people worry about the communication or how do you monitor productivity and quality of work, it's like the flip side of that is it makes the business be very lean and agile, and it can often be much more responsive and adaptive to things and can stay on top of an ever-changing market, which is really, really beneficial. That was today's episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please leave me a review or share this with a friend or a business colleague, and I will speak to you soon on the next episode. Take care. Good luck building your team. Bye.